Everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at this World Federation of Mental Health webinar on workplace mental health. My name's Elizabeth King. I chair the sector for workplace mental health at the Federation. I sit on the board of the World Federation of Mental Health, and I'm totally delighted to have the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. We'd love to get to know you in the short time we've got together. So if you'd be happy to pop into the chat at any time where you're coming in from, it'll help us feel connected to you. We've got people from all over the world. 170 people are joining us or something like that today, joining us now, or will be observing the webinar post this session. We popped into the chat early, a question for those of you who've been waiting so patiently. Thank you. And it was a question intended to get our minds ready for the important dialogue that's about to occur. The question was, what role does your workplace play in shaping your well-being and connection? Do you feel supported at work, and do you feel unnoticed at work? And it's a question intended to open our mind to our own experiences and the experiences of those around us. If you don't know, the World Federation is an international member organisation. It was founded in 1948, and the purpose of the Federation is to advance among all people of all nations the prevention of mental and emotional disorders and the proper treatment and care of such disorders and the promotion of mental health. The specific sector that brings you this webinar today is the sector on workplace mental health, and our role is to advance mental health in the workplace by promoting knowledge exchange, education, research, training, and policy development. This is an incredibly important moment in time to have this conversation, because mental health is the most commonly selected health problem that people suggest they're facing. 45% of people, according to Statistica, state that mental health is the biggest health problem they face. It's a complex problem because, as our president notes, mental health is not primarily a medical condition and the solutions are not primarily medical, which is why the workplace offers us such an incredibly powerful context for solutions. The workplace is the crossroad of our personal and social worlds. It can become a sanctuary for us to recover from life's bumps, and also a way for creating communities that really thrive. We're delighted to bring this session to you today. If we fail as a community to address the mental health crisis, our workplaces will experience a ripple effect. Productivity will decline even further, and it's already a problem. If we don't address the mental health crisis, turnover will skyrocket. Organisations will struggle to be innovative and resilient in the constantly escalating disruption. I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for the day. I must thank our committee members and our speakers for the incredible amount of work they've put into it, and we are really grateful for you coming to join us today. As you can see, this is a recorded webinar. We'd like to be able to share your ideas and thoughts throughout the world. We'd love you to put questions in the Q&A and comments as we go in the chat. The comments will help us all stay connected to the reality of mental health in the workplace in our lives. And with that, I'm delighted to hand over to Samuel.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Mario, just to let you know that Michael has joined. He's in the room now, if you can unmute him. It's my distinct pleasure and privilege to serve as your moderator for today's webinar. And as Dr. King indicated, this is a first in a series of webinars that are organized by the World Federation for Mental Health, the section on workplace mental health. This webinar, as was indicated, will be recorded, and the link will be posted on the World Federation website, hopefully in a few days. And it'll be repeated again on December the 13th at 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time and 8 p.m. Gulf Standard Time, to ensure that the content of what we'll be discussing today is available to our European and our Middle Eastern and African colleagues. For today's session, each of our speakers will offer a presentation, approximately 20 or 30 minutes in duration. And following that, we will take some time for discussion and for some questions. So if you have comments as we go along, please feel free to put those in the chat. If you have questions that you would like to pose to the panelists, if you can put those in the Q&A section, and several of us will be curating those as we go along to ensure that we cover as many of the questions as possible. Now, it's with much anticipation and excitement that I present to you our distinguished panel of speakers. Dr. Michael Leader received his PhD from the University of Oregon, his master's degree from Vanderbilt University, and his bachelor's degree from Duke University. Currently, Dr. Leader is honorary professor of organizational psychology at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia, and professor emeritus in Acadia University in Canada, where previously held the Canada Research Chair in Occupational Health. He's published widely on job burnout, work engagement, and workplace civility. And of late, his work through Michael Leader and Associates is focused on improving the quality of work life, with an emphasis on preventing burnout, enhancing civility, and respect amongst colleagues. His latest book is The Burnout Challenge, Managing People's Relationships with Their Jobs. Michael will be the first of our speakers. Our second speaker, also I'm very excited to hear, is Jana Cook, hailing from the Canadian Prairies and founder of JC Coaching. That's a coaching practice primarily dedicated to helping others prevent and reignite their flame post-burnout through one-on-one coaching and group workshops. Jana's professional experience includes nearly 2 decades in corporate leadership, human resources, and consulting. She's a certified leadership coach, a member of the International Coaching Federation, and an associate certified coach candidate. After personally experiencing debilitating burnout twice and noticing a lack of available supports, she was drawn to helping others prevent and navigate the murky waters of burnout. So today she will be bringing a real personal dimension to our presentations by talking about her own experiences of burnout. And then our third speaker, Robin Miller, is a senior manager at Deloitte with experience as a national regulator and global certification auditor. With his global experience as a certification regulator at Deloitte, Robin brings unique insights into workplace psychological health and safety, highlighting the benefits to organizations and their employees, including the return on investment for companies that prioritize mental health in their workplace. And he'll be speaking about that today. So without any further delay, I will invite Michael to kick us off with his segment.
Okay, thank you, Samuel. I'm going to, I hope, share my slides. So hold on just a minute till I get that started and get to the proper place for doing that. Whoops, that there.
There we are.
Okay, the slides are going and you can still hear me? That's great. Okay, I'm going to talk about, burnout as a relationship crisis. I'm talking about burnout as a relationship crisis, but I'm looking at the relationship of people with their workplaces and people within their workplaces. And as this image is conveying here, that the relationship isn't like a relationship among equals, that people generally experience their workplace as a much bigger, more powerful, more far-reaching entity than they are, and they are trying to find their way through, that relationship with their workplace and what can be done with it. And one of the outcomes when people are having some mismatches between what they're up to and what their workplace is providing is job burnout, which is this syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. That was a definition from the World Health Organization. And that syndrome has three components of exhaustion, and exhaustion meaning feeling exhausted before the workday even begins. Like feeling exhausted at the end of the day might just mean you worked hard. But if you feel exhausted before the day begins, then that's indicating there's a problem in terms of the intensity of work and the effectiveness of recovery. The second element is cynicism, which is a sort of psychological disengagement with the workplace and the people within. And in a way, that's the most insidious part of the burnout syndrome, because it is losing a capacity of connection between people and their work. And it gets very difficult to build that back again. It's sort of the opposite of trust. And trust is a hard thing to develop when it's gone. And the third element is a lack of efficacy and feeling ineffective at work. And these three components build on each other, such that when you're exhausted, it's hard to really be involved. You start to get more distant, and that can compound upon itself such that it becomes difficult afterwards to really feel effective. And the opposite state is being engaged with your work, which is being energetic, dedicated, feeling effective. And that these are sort of two ends of a continuum of experience for people at work. But that's not the whole story. There is what's going on in between. Is everybody either burned out or engaged, or are there other states that are relevant and call for different kinds of action and perspective? And what we do, we've basically done analyses where you take a whole lot of, like a few thousand people, records from a few thousand people who've completed the burnout scale that includes distinct indicators for exhaustion and for cynicism and for inefficacy. And you put those together and you sort of see, well, how do these things cluster? It's called a person-focused analysis. You say, well, what kind of patterns are there about how those scores fit together with each other? And you find, yes, there is people who are positive on all three and they're really engaged. And that's a very positive state to be. And hopefully that's most of the people that are in your survey. But there are also a few people who are into burnout syndrome. Everything's negative, and it's exhaustion plus cynicism plus a lack of efficacy. However, there are other people, and there you find there's a cluster, and sometimes a quite significant cluster, of people who are just exhausted. They're tired. They're not getting enough recovery. They're doing work that they believe in. They're not cynical about it at all. They think they're doing really important work. They're really connected with their service recipients, their clients, their patients, their students. They're really connected with that. And they have great confidence that they're doing good work and they're doing it well and it's important. But they're exhausted day in and day out, and they just can't get on top of that. That often gets labeled as burnout, but it's a much more straightforward issue. To be exhausted while feeling dedicated and effective is really different from being exhausted while feeling cynical and discouraged. That second one is a much deeper hole to dig yourself out of. And so basically what people who are in this overextended kind of frame of mind, what they're concerned about is their workload. The other aspects of work are going pretty well for them, but they like the people they're working with. They think that they've got a lot of latitude to work. It's just too much to deal with. We don't have enough resources. We don't have enough people here for the need that needs to be addressed. So that's a different kind of frame of mind. It calls for different kinds of action. In a way, it's more straightforward, but not necessarily easier to adjust workload or help people with recovery. But it focuses the problem in a different kind of way. But there are also people, in your profile that are just cynical. They're not tired. They're not exhausted because, well, they couldn't be bothered to get themselves exhausted. And they think they're going great. They just have lost the connection with the workplace. They're very cynical about what this place is doing, how well it's being managed, what kind of impact their work could have anyway in such a silly place to be working. And that's a different frame of mind. And I found as we work with various organizations, in some places, that's a fairly prevalent group. And then other places, there's like a children's hospital we're working with, and virtually nobody has that pattern at all. It just simply, if you don't survive in that children's hospital for more than a couple of days, if that's your view of the world, you're just out of there. So it's really interesting how that one changes. But again, that would call for a different kind of problem. That's a whole issue in terms of trust and relationships, particularly with people in management positions are particularly sour with this pattern when it does happen. And then there are also people who are just feeling ineffective. They're not exhausted. They're not cynical. It's fine. They got enough energy. The workload is manageable, and this is fine work to be doing. It just isn't particularly wonderful. Like with the people who are engaged, it's a real positive approach and experience. Whereas the folks in this category, well, they're more, it's okay. The workload, that's fine. Degree of control, I guess it's okay, but they're not, really positive about it. It's when all three come together that people are experiencing burnout. So it's this pattern shows that there are places in between, and those places in between are sort of defining the problem you're facing a little differently, because the full burnout syndrome just needs a lot of work in terms of that lack of efficacy combined with cynicism for people who are totally exhausted. So that's sort of the frame we're looking at this. And as I say, this is sort of a relationship problem between people and their workplace. And what we look at in terms of the workplace is the workload, how much there is, what kind of work, when it needs to be done, the intensity of it, but also a person's sense of control. Do you have some discretion about what work to do, where, when, and how? Are the rewards? Do you actually like doing the work? Is it intrinsically rewarding, or is it really tedious and boring? That makes a big difference in whether you're leaning towards burnout or away from it. Community is a huge one because people want to belong to work groups that value them and take them seriously. Fairness gives a sense of justice, of whether you're going to really be bought into this workplace and thriving in it. And this idea of values, are my values and the organization's values alike, or are we working across purposes? These are the kinds of things that's what people are encountering in that workplace, and what they're trying to connect with, either match with or have experienced mismatches with, is their core psychological motives, things like belonging and efficacy and autonomy from Dietschy and Ryan's self-determination theory. That idea that if you got a sense of belonging, you're going to a workplace that does accept you, recognize you, it respects you, and brings you into the operation of how they interact with each other, then there is some connection there. There's a good match. There's a good response in that way. But if you go into a workplace where it's a lot of hostility, or people are just isolated from each other, there's in groups and out groups, and you're in the out group, that kind of setting is really a crisis for an individual. So the problem isn't an individual having a motivation to belong. The problem is when that motivation to belong encounters a work context that runs contrary to that doesn't encompass that as part of what does it mean to work at this place and to be here. Likewise with sense of efficacy. Do you feel when you go to work that you're becoming smarter and more marketable and more intelligent and deeper each day you go to work? Or do you think every day I go to work, I become a little bit more stupid and get just dragging down into a pit? What's going on with that efficacy? Is it being fulfilled? Autonomy, you're certainly not all on your own in any kind of workplace, but do you have the experience of being someone who can initiate things, who can make something happen, rather than just being on the receiving end of other people's agendas all the time at work? So those kinds of core motives are sort of interacting with and connecting with and encountering the structures at work that are either allowing that to be facilitated or are just sort of mismatched with it in serious ways, such that people are frustrated. And that is a stressful place to be. So that sort of connection of, are your aspirations as they meet the structures at work, what's going on with that? And is it something where you're rising to new heights, or is it keeping you constrained into a fairly small box? So that's the core kind of framework we're looking at here. And so kinds of approaches to dealing with these mismatches between people and their workplace. And one kind of approach to that is, well, let's fit the people to the workplace. The workplaces are clearly well designed. Management is an exquisite art these days. People do it so well. And if some people are, if people are experiencing frustrations at work, clearly they're just not with the program. They're not strong enough. They're not really buying into what is important at work, and they need to be made stronger. And so if there is a problem, let's get healthier. Let's get more resilient. Let's build up your capacity to tolerate more and more difficult situations, because you should be able to handle workplaces as they're designed in the 21st century, because we've done a lot to address, you know, those really serious problems of the, you know, factories of the 19th century and 18th century. We've got things going in a much more positive way. So that's one kind of approach to things. It's looking at one side of the equation and focusing on that. Then looking at the other side of the equation is, let's fit the workplace to the person. Let's, whatever people are like when they come in the door, we need to make a niche for that within our organization. So this picture has lots of dishes and lots of different ways of people working in different alignments and different kinds of settings. So it's designing the workplaces for everybody. But you get in a problem with that strategy, and that the people are really, really different, and it's hard to anticipate everybody who's going to come in the door. And then as soon as they come in the door, they start changing. As soon as you get settled into a workplace, you've got a different kind of agenda, a different kind of way you want to go. So that niche that was made, that was just right last year, well, it doesn't really fit so well this year. So it's hard to come up with enough slots that everybody's got just the right kind of workplace. It's the metaphor we use in the book has to do with, was talking about how designing cockpits for pilots of jets, when jets first became a thing, that a whole lot of effort went into finding what were the average dimensions of a man. It had to be a man if it was a pilot in the 1950s. What was the average dimensions from their legs and their arms, their wrist to their elbow, and all these kinds of things, so that you could design the perfect seating situation, the perfect cockpit for the average guy. And so a lot of work went into that. And after they had, you know, 20, 30, 40 different dimensions that they got the average for, they went out to get those average guys to put them into those settings. And they found that they could barely find people who could hit average on even 3 of those scenarios. That average people are pretty rare. And that wasn't the answer. The answer was to design flexibility, so you could adjust the various pieces so that all kinds of different shaped people could be operate effectively in this environment. So that's where, you know, we talk about in the book the burnout, the burnout challenge that I'll be showing you by the time we get to the end of this. That the idea is thinking about work. It's a transactional relationship. Work is looking for something from you, and you're looking for something from work. And it's not just the explicit contract, it's also these psychological motives. And that it needs to be an ongoing process of collaboration, conversation, back and forth with leaders, with work groups, with individual employees, to find what's going to work here, and to collaborate with each other, to customize the situation to today's mix, and to commit to making that an ongoing development. And the outcome we're looking for is not the answer. The outcome we're looking for is a way of solving problems, dealing with challenges as they arise, following the kinds of development that people are moving through in their careers, adapting to the technology as it evolves, and the organization and its interaction with the outside world. Because what we sort of talk about is this igloo strategy, which is the individual. You got to have part of your strategy. You got to think, what are individuals going to do? They're not passive pawns in this game. They're active players, and they need to have a clear idea of what's it like and how do you survive and negotiate your way through complex workplace environments these days. And you got to help them with that level of literacy, sort of workplace literacy needs to be at a sophisticated level if they're going to be a player. And then you need to look at the group. The work group is the immediate context for people, a lot of interaction going on there. You bring in the leader, how's the leader being developed to deal with those more sophisticated individuals and their work groups. The organization as a whole needs to have policies that support those leaders and having an adaptive and flexible approach to how people are going to work and when and where and how. And then the others are, again, those government regulatory agencies, the accreditation organizations, the general ambience out into the larger culture and how that shapes. All that needs to be taken into consideration to have a synergy that develops a kind of workplace that's going to function on these multiple levels and be mutually supportive over time. And so we look at things like this. I'm going to go through quickly so we can have more of a conversation here, but there are things individuals can do. I talk about stealth job crafting as tweaking your job without letting anybody know that you're up to something. You're just quietly on your own. I'll make my work activities a little different than they were before. I'll do a bit more of what I like, a little less of what I don't like at work, and I'll see how far I can get with that before anybody notices. That's a strategy, or you can be more explicit with your employer on those kinds of issues. The manager can assist by opening up, more latitude, and unit managers need to work up the line to develop their managers to know that flexibility and adaptability is an important part of anything to do to prevent burnout, develop a workplace that's going to be more conducive of mental health going forward. And then on the work group level, there are things you can do in terms of the quality of that social environment for everybody in the group so that that becomes enhanced and supporting those other pieces. And the organization as a whole can be, if they're not behind it, if the top leadership is not working in the same direction, but really wants to be the one boss, with like the royalty of the organization, and not really looking at it as a dialogue with the people working there, that's going to be a real problem. So it's developing a leadership that is looking at leadership as supporting the work of the organization, not simply structuring it for people in that way. So that's the piece I wanted to give you an overview of. The book with Christina Maslach that we put out last year. It's called The Burnout Challenge. It's a good read, and it gives these kinds of ideas and this perspective on work. So I will stop there and go back and stop the sharing. And here we are. Oops.
Thank you so much, Michael. That's wonderful. It gives us a really good foundation for the following presentations that we're going to hear in a minute. There was one question. Well, there was a number of questions in the chat. Maybe we'll take one right now. And that is, if someone is on the brink of burnout or seems to be working up to burnout, can that begin to show itself in their relationships at home, for example? Might it extend to other contexts? Wonder if you have.
It could extend in that way. I think the foundation, and what particularly as a workplace leader, like what you've got much more to say about are the quality of the interactions that are happening at work. I think that's really sort of the source of issues, but certainly downstream. I mean, if you've been at work and having a lot of very difficult and unpleasant interactions with people all day, it's hard to be all that sweet when you go home. Like it sort of carries over. There's a bit of, but I think that's more of an impact. I find when you're looking at work family kind of balance, that work tends to win. It's got a lot more power behind it for a lot of people in that way. So, but I think the action point is going to be back at work, and how can you get a more civil and supportive workplace going?
Okay, terrific. Thank you. I'm sure we're going to have lots more questions, and there are some in the chat, but we'll reserve those for the end so we can have a bit of a discussion. So for now, I'm going to turn things over to Jana, who's going to give us a much more personal perspective, actually, on the experience of burnout, based on her experience personally, as well as working with others that she's provided coaching for.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. Can you hear me okay? Okay, excellent. Wonderful. So yes, my name is Jana Cook. I am a personal coach, guest speaker, workshop facilitator, all focused on the topic of burnout. And really, I'm going to share my own journey, my own personal story. And being a coach wasn't always my profession, and you're going to learn a little bit about that as I continue to share my story. So for the presentation today, really my conversation is for us to reduce some stigma around burnout in the workplace. I want to create more awareness and spark dialogue around this topic. When we spark that dialogue, it gives oxygen to it, which means it sparks the flame and reduces that burnout. And I think that's so incredibly important. I know we're talking about workplace burnout specifically today, but for me, I can't talk about my workplace experience in isolation without bringing in a lot of my own personal context. And stemming right off what Mark was saying, Michael was saying, pardon me, is it bleeds back and forth, your personal and your work. And so I'm going to be talking about my personal life as well, because to me, it was both of those pieces. It's burnout is stress, and it's that relentless stress that goes unmanaged, and that can come from all sorts of different avenues. So I'm going to talk about my story in 3 different parts. So talk a little bit about circumstances that were going on, symptoms, and then what I did to try to recover from that. And so the first part, called it the original burn. So there's my family in the bottom there. I have a husband and 2 cute little kids. I've got a little girl and a little boy. And so this was back in about 2001. And so what was going on at the time in 2001 was COVID, of course. Also, my husband was working full-time and I was working full-time. I was working in the financial services industry as a leader in a public-facing role. And so a lot of emotions would happen at work during the middle of COVID. Clients coming in, your team coming in, it's just a heightened state of emotions. But I really loved my job. I loved the work I was doing. I would work about 50 plus hours a week. And I was placed on lots of special projects where I got to really ignite passion in the work I was doing. And I would receive lots of great feedback, recognition, acceptance, some of these things that we were talking about earlier, right? And a lot of validation. And for me, for inside of me, that was a good source of where I was getting all that personal accolades from. I also felt like I had a really great voice over the work that I was doing. There was a sense of control over what I was doing, and I was able to grow and develop and work towards goals that I had professionally. Between my personal life and my work, there was obviously a lot of balls in the air, but everything was being balanced perfectly, and I was juggling those balls until one day when I wasn't. So as COVID was starting to ramp down, which was excellent, work expectations were starting to ramp up. And so that was giving me some extra pressure at work and extra hours that were being needed to be put in. At the same time, some of that senior leadership changed. And really, there was a big shift in dynamic in how our work was expected to be done and the amount of control I had at work. Also, a lot of that positive reinforcement and recognition and those special projects no longer existed for me. And I was actually feeling a need to go from being rewarded and recognized to having to defend my work and having to bring in external people to help me defend my work. There was just a variety of different situations that happened throughout this time that made me just feel very uncomfortable. And so that work dynamic shifted immensely. We were also told that while our work expectations were growing, that our resources to how we were to complete our work were going to be reduced. And so that added an extra element to things. Things for me personally started to unravel a little bit. Having 2 young small children at home, I also had some postpartum mental health concerns I was working through. And all of a sudden, I found myself just really having a fog run over me. I can remember so clearly one day driving the kids to daycare before work, like I would do every single day. And on this one particular day, I drove home, couldn't go to work, and it happened on more than one occasion. And it's just like your body goes into autopilot. Sleep. If any of you have had young kids at any point in time, you know sleep is a hot commodity. But my sleep patterns were affected more than just by having the little kids. And I found myself leaning on prescriptions to be able to fall asleep. I also picked up some other coping mechanisms which weren't great, like drinking more and isolating, and just really great things that weren't great for my mental health. I started to have brain fog, panic attacks, and I can recall just feeling so overwhelmed that one more task, asking us having to send, one more email was just the end of the world. And one day I just broke. I broke like a twig, and I just couldn't continue on. The day in particular was, I can recall my husband was working out of town. I had been applying for a role internally in my organization and interviewing for a few months and was told that I was not the successful candidate. And at the same time, within about an hour of that, was told that those resources that we would no longer, that were going to be being depleted from our system would be effective right away. And so more work, less people to do the work. And I was on a Zoom call with someone just like we're on right now, one-on-one. And the person just looked at me and said, Jana, are you on there still? What's going on? And I think my mind just went black, and it was not a good situation. I knew I had to take some time off of work. So that's what I did. I ended up taking 4 months off of work. And at this point I thought, burnout, it only impacts executives. You have to have a really high job title, be working, 100 plus hours a week. It happens to only the super elite. It doesn't happen to regular people like me. That was my impression of burnout. And so while I was off, I tried to spend some time relaxing, but when you're in that go, hyper scenario for a long time, it's really hard for your body to try to relax and for your mind to try to stay still. So I would do things like go for a run. That's a picture of me in a running race in the midst of trying to work through being burnt out. So I'd relax enough just to be able to do the things that I thought I should do to get back to feeling better. And it was really all quite surface level. What ended up happening is we decided that the best solution to all of this was to move. And I'm sure on the phone, or I'm sure on the line, you're thinking, that's not a good thing to do when you're burnt out. And I don't recommend it, but that's what we did. We decided to move an hour south to a smaller town where we thought things would be better. And that's what we did. And I went back to work. So part 2. So I go back to work to the exact same job that was causing all those stressors in a different location. So now I've got all those work stressors plus the stressors of moving. And on top of that, I really wanted to be able to integrate into the community. So I did things like join community boards, sign the kids up for all the sports. I decided to coach my daughter, who's in this picture, coach her 3-year-old soccer league. I have never played soccer in my life, and she did not do a single practice. She played on the playground the whole time. So I threw myself right back into all these things and these old habits. And as you can imagine, that probably didn't land well. In addition to all of this, because we had moved, my husband was now commuting extra. So some of that support mechanism that I had in the past, it also wasn't there. So as you can imagine, cut to 1 year later, I burnt out again. It was all the stressors from before, plus more, and I had all the same side effects as before. And it was an eerily familiar situation. And actually, the day that I burnt out the second time, that in my brain, I remember just a similar feeling, a snap. The day of this picture was the morning that I burnt out again. And, you know, you look at the picture and you think, you know, the couple, you know, a little girl and a lady, you know, everyone looks happy, right? But that's not what was happening inside. So the day that I broke again, I want to say snap, but I broke, was a similar circumstance in the fact that husband was out of town. I had been told that again that I wasn't a successful candidate for a role, an internal role that I've been applying for and working hard for. And I just didn't have that support mechanism around me. And this time I ended up taking 6 months off of work. And I want to say that knowing that it comes from a place of privilege, that I was able to take that time off work, because I know not everyone has that gift. And so I'm immensely appreciative of that. This time, though, I knew things had to be different, because the first time I took time off work, I kept it really surface level. And this time I knew I had to dig within myself to understand what was really going on. One thing that I did that was different was I looked at my core values. What was at the core of who Jana was? Not who Jana is supposed to be, not how I'm supposed to be showing up at work, but how do I really want to show up at work in a very authentic, real way? And that was a big shift for me that I actually didn't even realize was a mismatch until I went through this process. Also, identifying boundaries. I used to think boundaries were something that was just, you don't need those. But it turns out boundaries are actually like a roadmap to the choose your own adventure of life that helps set you up for what to do. And I did things like painting and baking and writing, and it was amazing. And so I felt really set up to go back to work. And I thought in my head, I got this. This is great. And so cut to here, part 3. So third time's a charm. So I went back to work. Although I had part of my roadmap that I had laid out for myself was that I knew that I needed to switch roles. And so I switched into a role I had done about 10 years prior. And I took that leadership hat off for the time being and kind of reduced some of that work stress, changed roles, changed my own leadership. And it was a really good balance. I was able to focus more on some of those core values that I had identified and have more flexibility, like being there for the kids. So what's interesting is that even though I had created this different dynamic at work for myself, what stressor that did come up was the fact that now, because I had removed myself from that leadership role and kind of stepped backwards, being underutilized at work is actually a stressor within itself. And that's what I started to experience. And this time, my body started to actually show different symptoms. This time, I thought I had the flu and kept thinking I had the flu. It wasn't the flu. Okay. I thought maybe it was perimenopause. And maybe it was partially that. But I went to the doctor, all the results came back really positive and great. And so I went to a friend of mine who's an acupuncturist. And on my second visit with her, she looked at me and said, Jana, there is no one that can help you until you get your stress under control again. And that's what I had to do. And so I went back to seeing a coach and a therapist and doing breath work and meditation and really grounding myself again in what was important. The thing that I learned is that wherever you go, there you are. You can't escape yourself, right? And so if you try to kind of hide and mask and not deal with the real root cause of what's happening and what's causing this burnout, it doesn't solve the issue. The reason why I wanted to share these pictures that are so personal of myself and my family is because I think in these 2 pictures here, I am in a really good place. And in those other pictures, I wasn't, but I'm the same person and I look the same. And as an employer, what's really important to know is that burnout doesn't look like a broken arm. Burnout doesn't look like a broken leg. It looks like the person in the pictures. You can't always see it. And so did I have bouts of crying at work in my experience? I did. I wish I didn't, but I did. But no one ever saw that. You saw this version. So really, I think, you know, Michael talks about all those key factors of what leads up to it and, you know, what causes burnout at work. And I think it's some of those really similar factors in your personal life at home. And when it comes to you both angles, personal and work, whoop, does that kick your butt? And so burnout's real. It doesn't discriminate, right? It doesn't care about your job status, your income, your job title, your family status, none of it. It doesn't care. And burnout's really sneaky. Think of it like the frog analogy. So you put a frog in a pot of cold water, or put a frog, pardon me, in a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out. It knows I don't want to be in a pot of boiling water. But you put a frog in a pot of cold water and slowly turn up that heat, it'll stay. And I think of burnout the same way. When the heat is slowly raised and the bar is slowly raised and all these different things happen, you don't even notice you're in that burning pot until sometimes it's too late. Also, burnout takes change within us to work through it. And when I say change within us, I mean both us as a person, so an employee, and us as in an organization from leadership. So if you have even the best systems and processes and tools in place to prevent burnout at work, you also have to make sure that the leadership at work is walking that talk. That's extremely important. And so it takes work within both internally in the organization and internally within us. And then finally, you're not alone. Burnout can be an extremely isolating experience, both from just feeling like no one else is going through this, and plus just withdrawing from people that you typically would want to be around, but you're not alone. And so reaching out is incredibly important. I think that's the main key points I want you to take away from this, is that it's both employee, employer. Burnout's real, doesn't discriminate, changes within both the self, the employee, and the employer, and you're not alone. And so if any of this resonates with you, reach out. I put my contact information there. But that's my presentation today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my story.
Yeah, and thank you so much for your transparency and for allowing us into your experience. I think it really does bring things to life, and really makes it much more real. So again, I'm very so appreciative of what you've shared. There are some questions that we'll get to later, but I'll just maybe put one to you right now. And that is, you know, when you began, particularly that first time, but even the second time, when you began to recognize that, you know, maybe it was time to take a break away from work in order to try to sort things out, or to just simply regroup. What was your experience of telling your manager or supervisor or the people around you at work?
Oh, that's a great question. I was extremely fortunate that my immediate supervisor was incredibly supportive. I didn't reveal a whole bunch at the time. I wasn't nearly as like transparent like I am today about my circumstances, but they were extremely supportive. Take the time you need. If you want to engage with us while you're off, please do. But yeah, and then when I went back to, very, very supportive, which I think does ultimately speak a lot about, you know, a lot of undertones of the employer, because I know that's not the case for every employment situation. And I hear some stories that are very heartbreaking, to be honest, about it. But I think that, you know, part of me getting so personal and sharing this story is, again, giving it oxygen, giving it air to talk about it. And the more that we can talk about it and be brave to do it, the less it's going to be okay for an employer to turn a blind eye, or an employer to say, oh, burnout, that's not real.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so important, I think, to have those conversations and to exercise some degree of transparency as a way of really breaking down barriers and stigma. So again, I really am appreciative of what you've shared today.
Thank you.
So now we're going to move to Robin's presentation. As I mentioned, Robin is with Deloitte. He's going to bring yet a third perspective to our theme this I was going to say this afternoon, but I realize it's all over the place depending on where you are. So Robin, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Yep. So hopefully you can see the screen as well, because I think this gives me more fear than speaking is actually trying to share a screen successfully to a multitude of people. But yeah, hi from dark and cold Canada. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not originally from Canada. I am from Scotland, but I've been here for 6 years now and definitely learning a few cultural differences, even though the language is the same. Before I begin, I guess I'd just like to acknowledge the insightful presentations that have preceded me. You know, Michael, I think your message of aspirations meeting structures particularly resonated. And as I go through my presentation, I think you'll understand why. And Jana, you know, your deeply personal story reminds us all, I think, of how workplace challenges can affect us all on a human level. And I really appreciate the vulnerability and you know, the honesty and the openness for sharing that. It doesn't happen enough, but I understand why. And people like yourself really kind of opens up the bigger conversation, which is what I talk about a lot in my day-to-day work at Deloitte. You know, I would like to add to the conversation, hopefully with some value in terms of like introducing psychological health and safety, and introducing it as a transformative framework, something for tackling these issues. But to a point that Jana made, you know, there are many definitions around it, and I always like to simplify it, maybe because I'm simple myself, but it's really about being given the opportunity to bring your authentic self to work without any equivocation, you know, and your best is your best on any given day, and it changes on any given day. And, you know, it's about being able to feel like you're empowered to come to work as your authentic self. I also want to hopefully advocate for people being the solution and not the problem to be solved. So when we look at big businesses, we look at entities that are developing and looking at large integrated complex systems that, you know, a lot of the focus has been problems. People are the problem to be solved. So I'd kind of like to maybe explore that a little bit as well. And also having, you know, psychological health and safety is about creating workplaces that actively support mental well-being, resilience, cognitive capacity while reducing harm, you know, caused by work-related factors. I too will share something a little bit personal. This is a topic that is very personal to me. I've spent 27 years in industry in operational oil and gas, in lots of leadership roles, particularly in the world of health, safety, and environment. And a number of years ago, as a reasonably healthy individual, I acquired a life-changing brain injury. And it wasn't until I was having to recover from that, I realized the importance of workplaces that empower people to thrive and not just to survive. So I come at this with some very sort of, let's just say, meaningful lived experience that hopefully kind of brings some kind of empathy to a world sometimes we forget is sometimes a bit superficial at times. As I go through the slides, I'm going to kind of just pose a question to the audience, just to maybe think and to think about how this can connect to your current circumstances. Predominantly at the work, but I think they can also translate as well into your personal life. So in terms of the overview, I don't want to dwell on it too much, but essentially this is the challenge. It's about our focus today is how we create workplaces that can thrive in a world that's essentially defined by rapid change, diversity, and complexity. Psychological health and safety isn't focused on compliance. It's about culture. And, you know, systems are always focused on compliance. I've been in North America now for 6 years, and even more so than Europe, compliance is a bigger conversation and discussion in the boardroom and at all levels within the organization than culture is. You know, psychological health and safety isn't static policies or processes, but it's dynamic practices. It's not just about prevention, it's also about growth, and it's not a top-down control. It's about shared responsibility and engagement. And as workplaces navigate rapid change and growing complexity, one of the key challenges that I see day to day within systems is something called fake empowerment. This typically happens when systems look, empowering on paper, but fail employees in practice. It creates frustration and disengagement instead of trust and motivation. And I think true empowerment requires systems that reflect real work conditions and allow employees to meaningfully shape decisions. So as I move on, my question here is, what does real empowerment look like, and how does it show up in your organization or the organization that you work with? So I'll move on. I think I win the prize for the most words. That's a very Deloitte thing. I apologize for that, but I'm trying not to speak to the slides, but speak to the overall picture. So apologies if it's not the most visually appealing. So the systems box, I like to think of systems as a box within a box, and the box is business. It's life. Boundaries shaped by legal, financial, technological, and moral constraints. That's kind of life as we know it. Then with systems in a corporate environment, we tend to double, triple, quadruple down on these, usually with good intentions to begin with. But we want to control, we want to make sure things are processed and they're efficient and effective. And all we tend to do is make a box that has no real kind of, let's just say, scale. We can define it, and then we define that scale to be something not just exceptionally small and claustrophobic, but incredibly rigid. And once you get there, it's very difficult to pull it back. So, some of the most successful companies in today's business are ones that can apply psychological health and safety, bring autonomy, bring empowerment to their employees, but make sure that systems box is as wide as they can. Dare I say, some are skirting on the boundaries of what is legal, but also a lot of them are through the boundaries of what is technological. So it's about having that empowerment as an organization as well, to not restrict yourself. And I think systems now, after nearly 30 years of being accredited and certified, are now having to rethink what they need to do from that framework perspective. Organizations with system thinking focus more on rules, statistics more than results, scrutiny over I will say calibration, but collaboration, and usually inadvertently complexity over simplicity. So the more rigid the system, the less adaptable it becomes essentially. So, we need to look at compliance as a baseline and not the finish line. And I think organizations that create opportunities for growth and trust, that's where you find them when they're not looking at compliance as their sole focal point within their system and their system architecture. So before I move on to the next slide, I would like you to think about, how do your systems within your organization balance the compliance with that adaptability? Where is the focus? Where does it really sit? So in terms of traditional thinking, it's about how could you move out of traditional thinking to try and maybe break that box or expand that box. And, breaking the box is about challenging the rigid top-down management approaches and embracing continuous improvement. I think we all talk about continuous improvement, but very little is done in terms of moving the needle because the system is always holding us back. Our aspirations are bigger than the architecture itself. We need to think of systems like products in perpetual beta, constantly evolving to meet the needs of employees, but systems as we know them and as we see them in industry, their changes can be measured in geological terms. They don't go quickly. They move very slowly, and the business, where in any other normal conversation in any meeting would rip it up and start again, they go, no, the system tells us this, we better follow the system. And the changes become more and more difficult. It's very inflexible and it lacks agility. So, what we need to think about now is that the world is perpetually changing. It's quick. It's, before we know it, there's another version that we have to update on our iPhone before we even got used to the new changes on the last update. Systems need to think the same way, and there's a very big gap currently with this. I'd like to come back to the people. I always say this in my day-to-day work, that employees are the true They understand daily challenges and solutions better than anyone. Without meaningful collaboration, empowerment becomes completely hollow. If you're close to the hazard or you're close to the product or the customer, then that makes you an expert and it makes you worth your voice worth something. But systems technically tend to flow down the way, not back up the way. And I think that's something that we need to consider in terms of traditional system thinking and how we can actually involve psychological health and safety more in this systems thinking. People are very agile, there's a lot of things that happen in the workplace where they have incidents and accidents, and the first thing that we do is wonder why they're here and they're not over there, and then we try and pull them back to where they should have been, but we actually realize that where they were is where they should have been in the first place. The business just didn't keep up with them and their knowledge and their insight. So we tend to look at their agility as insubordination at worst or inattention at best, but really their agility is a compass to improvement, to business improvement. So, with that in mind, who in your organization or organizations that you work with has the greatest insights in how systems can improve, or how the workflows can improve, or how processes can be made more efficient and effective? We tend to look at the assurance and governance functions. We then tend to tell people within the workforce how to do it and why it's changed. So I'll move on to looking at rebalancing the ownership. So yeah, leaders own the system till we own it together. Leaders don't tend to own the system, but certainly the governance and assurance functions within a large organization, the HRs, the safety department, the quality department, the finance department, they tend to own the systems. Leaders then, are fairly subservient to it, but they hold dear to it as well. But I think we need to use the metaphor that, a system is a puzzle where not one function or one person holds all the pieces. They're equally and evenly distributed to one another so that when they all come together, the picture can be seen. The big picture can be seen, but it can't be seen without that collaboration and with that togetherness. In many organizations, systems are owned, by the assurance functions, and it does become quite contentious. It does become quite difficult to move any meaningful conversations because it is very compliance-driven, process-driven. It's more than my job is worth to look beyond this, or to look wider, or to look more diversely. And I think that's another element that systems can tend to do subconsciously over time. People just become resigned to this system being the loudest voice in the boardroom and also through the assurance functions. I think, shifting ownership to a shared model becomes something that will, automatically and naturally become collaborative and adaptable. And then, that's when employees start to feel that they're part of a bigger collective that is involved in designing solutions, or at the very least having their opinions, their experience heard in a meaningful way. So, what would change if employees had real input into the systems that they use every day? What we tend to see is that they are scrutinized heavily with checklists or audit forms, and they need to understand what they've done wrong or why they've not done something, and they're really not allowed to come back with any input. It's really received. It's not, there's no real two-way communication, which still happens to this day. I generalize as well, because obviously different companies are different sectors are different, there are different regulatory demands. I understand that, but the root of the problem is still the same. It's, we need to engage more with the experts that are the people that are on the factory floor, that are on the telephone line to the customers, etc. So I'm going to move to the next slide, which is basically a slide about just culture. I always say, it's cheaper to blame people than it is your system. Just culture is essentially something that I've worked with for many, many years, but it's not something I see very regularly. within many organizations. And it always surprises me, so how does your organization react to mistakes? I think this is the key question in creating an just culture. It's the cornerstone to my mind of psychological health and safety. Blame destroys trust, and it definitely fuels burnout, amongst many other things. A just culture shifts the focus from individual fault and failing to systemic learning, and hopefully creating a safer space or a safe space for improvement. Leaders set the tone. I think we can all agree to that. And by admitting their own mistakes and maybe modeling a focus of systemic solutions, this can then foster more of a just culture and more of a learning and psychologically healthy and safer space. It's difficult to stand up in front of people when you're deemed to be the leader and have all the answers. But some of the most successful companies that we see in terms of their psychological health and safety are where leaders are happy to put their heart in their hands, their brain in their hands, and say, I don't have all the answers. I rely on you. I am a human. I do fail. I want to fail. Failure is where growth comes from. And I think, I think a lot of the issues that we have when we engage with clients, when I was a regulator, when I was an auditor, failure is not acceptable. Even that we are human beings, we are fallible. We fail all the time. The minute we cross the threshold into the organizational office or into the site, then failure becomes something a little bit more untenable and something that's not accepted. And I think we need to learn to build the failure, within our system, we need to build a presence of being able to fail safely. And I think that's the trigger and the change. So, if you all want to reflect on it, does your organization or the place that you work or the organization that you represent or work with, do they treat mistakes as opportunities for learning, or is it very much a reason for blame? Is it something that is simply easy to dismiss and easy to rectify in the scope of learning through investigation? So I think it's something that resonates with most people, because I see a lot of people with regards to investigations at work tend to scratch the surface and don't look at that systemic root cause. So I will move on. Systems built for adaptation. I think in the face of disruption and the future of work, the future of work is about still being people-centric. A lot of people come to Deloitte and a lot of bigger organizations and say, yeah, I need to understand what the technology is going to do. I need to understand about augmented reality and artificial intelligence and how it's going to change. But actually, the future of work is still very people-centric. And it's why psychological health and safety is of paramount importance as we look at the future of work. People centricity, but technologically enabled. The future of work is also about being deliberately diverse and fast-paced, but it also requires psychological safety as well. And I think really what we need to think about is how systems can play into all of these elements, but in particularly fast-paced piece. Systems that are designed and built are not fast-paced and will really get into the way. They will get in the way of this beta adaptation and moving things on, moving to the needs of your customers, your clients, your patients, and whomever. So when we look at assurance activities, we tend to look at them, they tend to look through the lens of scrutiny. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? You're not doing it the way it's meant to be done. Get back to doing it how it's meant to be done, rather than maybe the lens of facilitation. And a lot of the discussions I have are really about taking assurance where we do have to satisfy shareholders and we have to satisfy boards and senior leaders and middle management that we're doing things according to the law, to compliance and to the processes, but we can do it in a more facilitative way, a more leaning towards conversation than interview and interrogation. And I think I still see a lot of interrogation even in an internal space where in the lunch break they're colleagues, and then after lunch it's toe to toe, let's show me the evidence or we're going to mark you down as a non-compliance. It's quite an interesting dynamic. I think, you know, shifting to facilitation and the conversation and looking at systems in a less rigid way and looking at the fact that there is blurred lines and you can cross them because it's not all going to be bad when you do. This does build resilience, and it creates systems that evolve alongside organizational needs. And I think that's some of the things that we need to really focus on. A lot of the systems look back the way they don't look forward. And I don't know any other business that, you know, no businesses tend to look back the way they want, always looking forward. They're looking for the next opportunity. They're looking for the next selling point, the next service point, etc. So I think it's really important to see that systems, you built them, you can destroy them. You've built them, you can redesign them. There seems to be like this sort of frozen sentiment that it's been done, I can't destroy it, I can't even contemplate changing it. And I think that's a cultural thing that we need to kind of get over to. We being industry, obviously, but I see it so often. I'm conscious of time, but I'm going to get to this slide here. It's the return on investment, and it's not something I like to talk about. And I work for Deloitte, but I'm definitely not a finance guy. But this is where we tend to sell psychological health and safety in terms of return on investment. And, you know, for every dollar invested in mental health initiatives, there are returns that are double and maybe quadruple. And, you know, that goes without saying. You're investing in people, you're giving them more autonomy, you're basically giving them more room to innovate and to be agile. And that's quite a motivator. So you can kind of see how it correlates. I tend to think about this as a return on intelligence. Not my phrase. The phrase is from a gentleman that I liked to read, 3D Leadership. His name escapes me. Terence. I've forgotten Terence's. No, I've forgotten his surname. I won't even try to attempt it. But he coined the phrase of return on intelligence. It's not about the soft metrics. It's about creating environments where people do their best work. You know, traditional metrics like absenteeism, retention only scratch the surface, really. A more meaningful measure is return on intelligence, how well an organization learns, adapts, and grows. It's also about tapping into that intelligence of the employees and their knowledge and their experience and their expertise of what they know to be right that's just being ignored because the process tells them so. Psychological health and safety drives this return on intelligence by fostering innovation, collaboration, and engagement. Organizations with strong frameworks in psychological health and safety see measurable improvements in productivity and decision making. So much so that, you know, when I worked in oil and gas, we basically gave up having to do a business plan. There was a set of money. All you need to do is bring a receipt, and if it worked, it worked. Tell me how it worked and tell me what kind of savings we made. It's all about giving that trust to some very experienced people and to try and remove bureaucracy as much as possible and then build upon that trust with the confidence of the workforce. You know, it's about the scalability and the growth-orientated mindsets. Apologies, that is a very sort of Deloitte phrase. But really, from a vertical and horizontal perspective, psychological health and safety helps leadership align their vision, but also with the understanding and with their understanding of the operational realities and in some cases operational deficits that they didn't know about. And then horizontally, again, back to this collaboration and the creativity across all the functions and forms. I'll re-emphasize the point. Psychological health and safety empowers organizations to build trust, to embrace change, and to unlock potential for that sustainable growth. And that change is not something to be feared, it's something that they actually want as an outcome. They want that dynamism in their thinking, in their systems. So, you know, how is your organization leveraging its collective intelligence to drive this innovation and resilience? And does your organization recognize your employees and your workforce as that collective intelligence? So transformational leadership in action, it's really about leadership in the future of work. It's really about adapting to the language of the many, not asking employees to speak the language of the few. How many times have we been told to go and practice our P's and Q's for delivering a presentation to C-suite executives? And I always scratch my head thinking, well, maybe they should just learn the language of the employees and we can all get on with this. But, I think this is a really important element here, and it is about breaking down the barriers and understanding that we all have different languages and we all have to adapt, and we should all have to adapt. We shouldn't have to conform to one person's needs or wants. Transformational leaders align their approach with the diverse realities of the workforce. They create environments of trust, and they certainly create environments of collaboration. The most effective leaders, they ask what's known as better questions. Instead of telling their employees what to do, they kind of ask them what they need to succeed. Rather than go to the shop floor and say, can you tell me what procedure you're following and what hazards are in front of you or whatever you're meant to do per minute, per hour, maybe the better question is, as the leader of this organization, if there's one thing that I could change in your working life, what would it be that would make your life different for the better? I've yet to see a leader go to the shop floor and just speak that truth and be vulnerable in asking that. A lot of leaders think that they're going to be asked for $1 billion more in their OPEX or CAPEX, but sometimes it can just be something so simple as having an extended lunch break, or to have some upgrades in the showers from the changing rooms. It's about that human connection. And I think one thing I would like to say is, that this isn't all on leaders, it's about the whole synergy of the organization. And a lot of leaders are fearful. They can be fearless in other areas in terms of earnings before interest and tax, but they can be very fearful when it comes to speaking to people as a person. And I think that's perfectly okay. That is acceptable human behavior. So, how often are your organizations and your organizational leadership team, how often are they going to speak to everybody and asking them what they need to succeed over and above what they have? How often are they going to speak to them about, well, what's missing? I never really see that either.
Audio there for some
This is
reason.
my last slide. So thank you for your attention. I think the way I like to finish this is like every small change starts with a ripple. Let's create workplaces where systems serve all, not just leadership or assurance functions. Systems have a place. Systems are here to stay. Systems can be effective. Systems can help us. They can enhance our psychological health and safety. Just currently, and how we are still looking at them and how we play with them is very 20 years ago. The systems themselves have changed. They've removed a lot of the requirements for processes, procedures, for meetings. They recognize themselves that there needs to be more human interaction, but everybody is too scared to break those shackles because of the compliance of either the certification of the system or the compliance of the legal requirement. So, the future of work is here. And it demands systems that are people-centric and technology-enabled, and again, as I said, deliberately diverse. I think by empowering employees, addressing the fake empowerment that I mentioned earlier, and fostering trust, we can build environments where people thrive and organizations succeed. The return on intelligence, the workforce collectively have a lot of the answers. Their agility and their speed to respond need to take precedence. And the opportunity is ours to shape a future where engagement, and well-being and innovation go hand in hand. So my final question would be what is one meaningful change you can make today to create a workplace where people thrive? Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Robin. That was wonderful. So we've had a very complete program. We started out with an overview of what burnout is and its various dimensions so that we have some grounding and understanding of the topic that we're covering, and then moved to a very human-centric perspective on the experience, the subjective experience of burnout. and the insidiousness of it and the manner in which it unfolds in a very, very subtle way. And then finally, I think, Robin, you provided us with some real food for thought in terms of what organizations might need to do as a way of really trying to mitigate against burnout and to create cultures that really support employees in being their best self when they come to the workplace. So at this point, with the time that we have remaining, I think we've got just a little bit, just around 10 minutes or less. What I'd like to do is to invite anyone in the audience that has a question to use the reaction button, I think it's called, to put up your hand, and then we'll call on you. You can unmute yourself and ask the question so that it feels a little bit more participatory. If not, I have some questions I think that have been coming in through the chat and some things that people have put in the Q&A section as well. But please feel free to put up your hand and unmute yourself. I should also add rather, you don't need to ask a question. If you'd like to make a comment or an observation or share something of your own experience at your organization or other organizations you've been at, that's certainly welcome as well, as it's certainly can enrich the discussion and our learning. Yeah, the reaction, Elizabeth is just pointing out the reaction button is at the bottom of the screen. Just hit the arrow. And there's an icon for putting up your hand. Yes, Elizabeth. Just unmute yourself there.
Did I do that?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I didn't mean to, but I would like to bring our attention, Osmar, could I just bring our attention to one question that was in the chat? The lady who put it in has left now, but if we could direct it to Michael, I think it was, the question was about whether we think that the World Health Organization is going to expand the definition of burnout to be inclusive of areas outside of work. I think that was the specific question. Yeah.
I think it can certainly go in that direction. I think what I read with the background to saying, focusing specifically on work, is that there's been a lot of research on burnout within work. Like there's 1,000 articles a year being published on burnout at work. There are very few. The research base for burnout in other arenas, such as at parental burnout or at sports or that kind of other domains of life, creative burnout, there is a lot thinner research base on that. So I think they're also looking for the research community to just develop more of a solid base of knowledge. And it certainly makes sense that that combination of exhaustion and distancing and discouragement could pertain to other domains of life. But I think that was part of the hesitation with the WHO document to take it beyond work settings.
Thank you, Michael. Mark, you have a question. Oh, you just have to unmute yourself first.
Oh, there it is. Sorry. Thank you. I couldn't get that to happen. Fascinating presentations. Thank you, everybody. My one is to Michael as well. Michael, I'm curious as to why I've not seen much in any of the research into burnout that speaks to the mental health, mental ill health, actually, that people might experience. You know, the sort of shame that I can't keep up, that I'm letting the side down, and the anxiety that develops as a result of it, or even sitting for too long with it and possibly developing a depression, or whether clinical or subclinical. But it's never seemed to be mentioned in there. Is there a reason why it's not come up? Or?
I think just the practicalities of sort of the research. I think conceptually it is in there. It's certainly that idea, and it's within the WHO definition as well of saying, well, burnout is a occupational phenomenon. It of itself isn't a mental illness, but it has implications downstream for physical health and well-being, and so that particular scenario sort of goes beyond the frame of a lot of looking at burnout within workplaces. I think what I'm saying is too many academic research studies are too time limited. They're sort of tied into granting cycles and things like that, and it is going down the road where you start finding these deeper, more wide-ranging kinds of impacts. It certainly needs to be looked at, but I certainly agree there's not enough work on that, even though conceptually it's waiting there to happen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in my experience, it speaks to the psychological safety sort of conversation that, if I will sit in that discomfort and sort of wallowing in self-shame, and I'm speaking from personal experience.
Okay.
But if it didn't feel psychologically safe to speak up,
Yeah.
that could even be something I put on myself. I don't want to let the team down. I don't want to let the side down, etc. So I'm just going to keep sitting here in this rather than actually reach out. Yeah.
I think on that score, Mark, the intention, as I understand it from the World Health Organization, is that burnout will be included in the next iteration of the ICD. And so it'll be interesting to see how it's defined or listed in terms of the symptomatology that they identify. I mean, certainly some of the research that Michael covered today, and the experiences that Jenya described would be a good start in terms of trying to define it within that context of mental health.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I look forward to that.
Yeah. Michael P. You got to just take yourself off mute, Michael.
Wasn't letting me unmute there for a minute. I think the person controlling behind the scenes. An open question to the three speakers. We didn't really get into the specifics of what would some of the key or must-haves be for psychological health and safety in the workplace, if you were to develop a framework.
That's a fantastic question, Michael. I wish I had the time to answer it in full. And actually, there's still a lot of debate around what that actually looks like. I think psychological health and safety from a framework perspective is almost like a fingerprint. It really depends on what your organization looks like, where they're based, what they're doing, who they're doing it with. It definitely needs to start with engagement. And when I say engagement, I mean something a little bit more robust, something a bit more beyond the annual, here's 6 questions, there's multi-guess, and we'll get back to you in 6 to 8 months' time. I think it really requires the engagement of leaders to cross-pollinate and go into different areas and then really kind of pick up the sense from other teams. One of the things that we see that is very successful is what's really called cross-learning teams. So taking people, professionals from different diversity in terms of their age, their knowledge, their culture, their education, their background, and also their department, and then putting them into groups where they are a little bit less comfortable, they don't know one another. It kind of gets them to think about looking at things objectively and forward facing rather than that cycle of the perpetual frustration and they never listen to us in the group that they kind of peer with. And the business, if they're insightful and clever and they understand what they want to look at, can give them topics to choose from to then as a group have a look and see what can be done in relation to the business. That's a sort of very generic answer. I can't be more specific given the time constraints, but I think that's one of the best ways to do it because that can then build a framework based on all the individuals that have been able to get some time and exposure with one another where maybe they just didn't have that opportunity, whether it's accounts meets safety meets shipping and distribution, or whatever that looks like. That can be very fruitful.
Maybe we have time for just one more question. It's a question from the chat. I think it's Lasha Porter. Forgive me if I've mispronounced your first name, Lasha. And the question is, any advice for people leaders who have someone in the cynical stage to get them back into a more engaged employee space? Janya, maybe if, again, based on your coaching experience as well as your own experience, what might someone have been able to say to you? And please, our other two speakers, if you want to jump in as well.
Yeah, and I see Robin did kind of pop in a couple questions in there. To me, when I was reading this question, my first thought was, I guess it depends on your level of trust that you have with the employee. Because if there's already a really strong level of trust, I think sometimes just offering, if they're open to some observations that you've made, can make a really big impact when it comes to leader to employee. And just asking, what's behind this shift? What's different? What's going on in your world? And just trying to open that dialogue right there. Because sometimes when you're in that state, and that's not your typical state of being, I feel like you don't necessarily know you're there. And so if you have that relationship of trust already with your employee, then offering those observations and just letting them know, I'm coming from a place of care and concern, and I want to have this conversation with you, and being really genuine in your response can open up a really great dialogue. If the trust isn't there, it might not be so smooth though, and that might be a different conversation.
Yeah, Jana, that's a great point. And, I did offer a couple of things there, but I think the sentiment behind my questions typed were really about allowing frustration. Frustration is not a negative emotion, it's a positive emotion, particularly in the workplace. A lot of frustration comes from wanting to do things better. Wanting to do things better comes from a place of wanting to be more efficient. And if people were less precious about the systems and the structure, they would recognize that as a positive. So it's about creating a space to say, what, frustration is absolutely welcomed here, and then give them the mic. Hey, you obviously have some ideas. Let's hear it. We are all ears. And I think that doesn't happen because we have this compliance mindset where, well, I'm sorry, Jana, that's what it says you have to do, and I don't have the time to talk about it further. So it is about that trust building, and it is a two-way element, right? You don't earn trust by a job title, and I think that's one of the biggest mistakes.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Michael, anything that you wanted to add to that?
Well, I guess just consistent with those lines, I think trust is, it takes a lot to build trust. Building mistrust can be done. You could do that this afternoon with no trouble at all. But building trust is something that takes quite a while. And it means really being responsive to, as a leader, being responsive to what employees are bringing to you. And so those first line leaders really need to have the latitude to be able to respond in a meaningful way. Because how you build mistrust is, I've given you a problem, and you're giving me nothing back. And I think that happens with employee surveys, and that happens with difficult conversations with leaders. They have to be empowered, trained, and encouraged to respond with something meaningful. And then you can build some trust.
Yeah, thank you so much. In our organization, I'm very fortunate to be in an organization where we are encouraged to fail fast. In other words, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to bring those mistakes to light, and very much in keeping with what Robin was speaking about, to use that as a way to move forward. And part of failing fast is, again, very much akin to what Jane is saying, that when someone is failing at the level of their personal performance because they're really struggling with cynicism and burnout is beginning to take hold, being able to have a conversation about that in an open manner, I think can be very transformative. It's the first and essential step, I think, to any sort of healing for that individual. I think we're a little bit past time, so I want to take the opportunity certainly to thank our three speakers. I think it's been a very, very rich set of presentations and conversations. And then equally, I really want to extend thanks to all of you that have joined us today for your comments in the chat, the questions in the Q&A, your attentiveness. I do hope that you've taken some things from the presentations today that can be applied and can have some resonance in your own workplaces. As I mentioned at the outset, we will be repeating this on December the 13th. I think flyer is available on the website of the World Foundation. So if you have colleagues that can certainly benefit and contribute to this conversation, please let them know. We look forward to that. And then there will be other presentations or webinars rather with different themes, but all relating to workplace mental health over the course of this coming year. The next one, I believe, Elizabeth, is it February or January?
Targeted for February, and we'll be advertising that in the next few weeks. So we'd love to have that in your diary.
Yeah, so please keep a lookout for that. Again, much of this will post on the website of the foundation so that it's available to you. And then finally, maybe just a very brief, unapologetic plug. The World Foundation, as Elizabeth indicated at the outset, is very committed to obviously the issue of mental health globally and on all sorts of levels. Our section, the workplace mental health section, is a relatively new section. We would certainly encourage participation if it's something, again, that you feel that you can contribute to or benefit from in terms of simply even being a passive participant. Please consider joining us in our efforts to ensure that this is a topic that remains front and center for employers. So thank you again for giving us your time.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, everybody.